In the summer of 2005, 12-year-old Emma Caldwell vanished from her bedroom 3 days before her 13th birthday party. No broken window, no sign of struggle. Her door was still locked from the inside when her parents found her bed empty at dawn. 8 years later, her brother was cleaning out their late grandmother's attic when he found it wedged behind a loose floorboard, pages yellowed with age and fear. What he read in those faded pages made him call the police immediately, and revealed a secret so dark that it shocked an entire town. The attic ladder groaned under Jake's weight, like it remembered the last time someone had climbed up here. That someone had been Emma, probably. Back when she was 11 and still thought their grandmother's attic was some kind of treasure cave instead of a dusty graveyard for broken furniture and moth-eaten Christmas decorations. Jake's shoulders scraped the low beam as he hauled himself up through the opening. The air hit him thick and stale, decades of heat and dust and the ghost smell of his grandmother's lavender sachets that had long since crumbled to powder. Grandma Rose had died 3 weeks ago. Heart attack in her sleep, peaceful as you could ask for at 87. The funeral was small, just family, a few neighbors, Mr. Henderson from down the street, who'd helped her with groceries for years. Now Jake was here alone, sorting through a lifetime of accumulated memories that nobody wanted, but nobody could throw away either. He clicked on his phone's flashlight. The beam cut through floating dust motes, revealing towers of cardboard boxes labeled in his grandmother's careful script. Christmas 1987. Emma's baby clothes, Jim's army things. His chest tightened at that middle box. 8 years, and Emma's name still hit him like a punch to the ribs. Jake was 26 now. Had been 18 when she vanished, old enough to drive, old enough to vote, old enough to protect his little sister, old enough to have stayed home that night instead of going out with friends, drinking beer behind the Walmart and pretending he was more grown up than he was. He pushed the guilt down. Same old weight, same old groove it carved through his thoughts. The floorboards creaked under his boots as he moved deeper into the attic. Most of the boxes were marked and stacked neat, but in the far corner under the sloped roof where the shadows pooled thick, the floor looked wrong. One board sat higher than the rest. Not by much, maybe half an inch, but enough to catch the light funny. Jake knelt, ran his fingers along the edge. The board was loose, held down by nothing but gravity and years of settling dust. He worked his fingertips under it, pried up. The wood came free with a soft groan. Underneath was a gap maybe 8 inches wide, just deep enough for someone small to hide something they didn't want found. And there it was. A red leather diary, smaller than his palm, the kind with a tiny brass lock that wouldn't stop anyone but might slow them down. The leather was cracked now, dried out from years in the heat. The brass had turned green, but he knew it instantly. Emma's diary, the one she wrote in every night after dinner, curled up on her bed with her legs tucked under her, tongue poking out the corner of her mouth when she concentrated. The one that had vanished with her. Jake's hands shook as he lifted it from its hiding place. The leather felt brittle, like it might crack if he squeezed too hard. There was no dust on it. Whoever put it here had wrapped it first, in what looked like an old pillowcase. Why would Emma hide her diary in Grandma's attic? When would she have had the chance? His thumb brushed the tiny lock. It was already broken, the brass clasp hanging loose. Someone had forced it open. Jake sat back on his heels, the diary balanced on his palm like a live thing that might bolt if he moved too fast. 8 years of wondering, 8 years of his parents' careful silences and his mother's red eyes on Emma's birthday every July. 8 years of unanswered questions and cold leads and police officers who stopped returning their calls. And now, this. He opened the cover. The first page was Emma's handwriting, that careful 12-year-old script, all loops and careful spacing. Property of Emma Rose Caldwell. If found, please return immediately. Private. Below that, in smaller letters, this diary belongs to me, and if you're reading this without permission, you're a snoop, and I hope you get in trouble. Jake's throat closed. She'd been such a little smartass. Always had an answer for everything, always thought she was funnier than she was. Always right, too, which made it worse. He turned the page. June 15th, 2005. Today was boring. Mom made me clean my room again, even though it wasn't even messy. Jake's being stupid about Melissa Gardner. He thinks she likes him, but she obviously doesn't, because she laughs at him, not with him. Boys are so dumb. Despite everything, Jake almost smiled. Emma had never liked Melissa. Turned out Emma was right about that, too. Melissa had blown him off the week after Emma disappeared, said he was too weird, and always talking about his sister. He flipped ahead a few pages. June 20th, 2005. Mr. Henderson helped Mom bring in groceries today. He's so nice. He asked if I needed help with my math homework. I said yes, because algebra is stupid and impossible. He said he'd come by tomorrow after school to help. Jake frowned. Mr. Henderson, Frank Henderson, the retired math teacher who lived 4 houses down. Jake remembered him vaguely from that summer. Tall, thin man with gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Always helping neighbors, always had time to fix a broken fence or explain a homework problem. He'd been one of the first to join the search when Emma went missing. Organized half the neighborhood, handed out flyers, coordinated with the police. Jake's parents still spoke of him with gratitude, how he'd held the family together when they were falling apart. Jake turned more pages, looking for the last entry. Something cold was starting to curl in his stomach, though he couldn't say why. July 3rd, 2005. Something's wrong, but I don't know what. Mr. Henderson came by again today for homework help, but we didn't do any homework. He just asked questions, like what time do Mom and Dad get home from work? Do I ever stay home alone? What do I do when I'm by myself? Jake's blood went cold. July 5th, 2005. I found pictures. Mr. Henderson dropped his folder when he was leaving, and photos fell out. Pictures of me, at the bus stop, in our backyard, through my bedroom window. He said they were for a neighborhood safety project, but that doesn't make sense. Why would he need pictures of me in my pajamas for safety? Jake's hands were shaking now. The diary felt heavier, like the words were made of lead. July 7th, 2005. I tried to tell Mom about the pictures, but she said Mr. Henderson is just being nice, and I shouldn't be suspicious of people who help us. She said I have an overactive imagination, but I know what I saw, and I know he's been driving past our house every day, even when he doesn't stop. July 9th, 2005. He knows I know. Mr. Henderson was here when I got home from school, sitting in the kitchen with Mom, drinking coffee like everything's normal. But when Mom went to get more sugar, he looked at me and smiled. Not a nice smile, a different one. He said, "We should talk soon, Emma. Just you and me, about those pictures." I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Jake's chest was tight, like someone was squeezing his ribs. He could barely make out the words now. Emma's handwriting was getting messy, hurried. July 10th, 2005. Tomorrow is my birthday party. I should be excited, but I'm scared. Mr. Henderson said he has a special present for me. He said it's something we'll have to keep secret from Mom and Dad. He said if I'm a good girl and don't cause trouble, everything will be fine. But if I tell anyone about our private conversations, something bad might happen to Jake. The diary slipped from Jake's numb fingers, fell open to the last page. July 11th, 2005. If someone finds this, I hid it here because it's the only place he doesn't know about. Mr. Henderson is taking me somewhere tonight. He said it's just for a little while, just until I learn to be quiet. He said no one will believe me anyway, because everyone trusts him. He said Jake will be safer if I go with him and don't fight. If I don't come back, please tell Jake it's not his fault. Please tell Mom and Dad I love them, and please don't let Mr. Henderson hurt anyone else. The entry ended there. No signature, no final words, just silence. Jake sat in the dusty attic, Emma's diary open in his lap, and felt his world tilt sideways. Mr. Henderson, the kind neighbor, the helpful retiree, the man who'd organized search parties and comforted his parents and shaken Jake's hand at Emma's memorial service, the man who lived 4 houses down, The man who was probably home right now, watering his roses and reading the evening paper. The man who had stolen his sister. Jake drove home with Emma's diary pressed between his palm and the steering wheel, her words burning through his skull like acid. Henderson is taking me somewhere tonight. Please tell Jake it's not his fault. Please don't let Henderson hurt anyone else. His hands shook so hard he had to pull over twice, once at the red light by the grocery store, once in the parking lot of the old Dairy Queen where Emma used to get birthday cake ice cream every July 12th. Both times he sat there gulping air that wouldn't fill his lungs, staring at houses and storefronts that looked exactly the same as they had 8 years ago, like nothing had changed, like the world hadn't just cracked open and shown him the rot underneath. Frank Henderson still lived on Maple Street, still got his mail every morning at 9 sharp, still waved at neighbors and helped Mrs. Garcia next door with her garbage cans. Still walked past the Caldwell house every evening on his constitutional, as he called it. Still stopped to chat with Jake's dad about the weather, the baseball season, how well the tomatoes were growing this year. Jake's stomach lurched. He shoved the car door open just in time to vomit into the Dairy Queen parking lot. Coffee and bile, and 8 years of not knowing. 8 years of wondering if Emma was dead in a ditch somewhere or living under a new name in some distant city. 8 years of his parents' careful hope and careful despair. 8 years of Henderson's sympathy casseroles and Christmas cards. By the time Jake pulled into his parents' driveway, the sun was setting behind the maples that lined Maple Street. Golden light slanted through the leaves, warm and peaceful, like a postcard of small-town America. 4 houses down, Henderson's porch light was already on. Jake could see the old man's silhouette moving behind the front window, probably fixing dinner, probably planning his evening walk, probably thinking about whatever the hell monsters think about when they're pretending to be human. Jake's parents were in the kitchen when he walked in, Dad reading the paper at the table, Mom stirring something that smelled like beef stew. The same scene from 1,000 dinners, except now it felt like theater, like they were all just playing parts in a story that had ended 8 years ago. "How'd it go at Grandma's?" Mom asked without turning around. Linda Caldwell was 51 now, graying at the temples, lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before Emma disappeared. She worked at the elementary school office, answered phones and sorted mail and made sure kids got picked up by the right people. She'd gotten very good at making sure kids got picked up by the right people. "Fine," Jake said. His voice sounded normal, steady. "Just a lot of old stuff." Dad looked up from the sports section. Tom Caldwell was built like a tree trunk, thick shoulders, thick hands, thick neck that went red when he was angry or upset. He managed the hardware store downtown, knew everyone in a 50-mile radius, could fix anything that broke and break anything that needed fixing. He hadn't been able to fix Emma's disappearance. "Find anything interesting?" Dad asked. Jake's hand tightened around the diary in his jacket pocket. The leather was still warm from his palm, still brittle with age and secrets. Something bad might happen to Jake. Everyone trusts him. Please don't let Henderson hurt anyone else. "Just some old photos," Jake said. "Family stuff." Mom smiled, the careful smile she'd worn for 8 years, bright enough to hide the cracks, never quite reaching her eyes. "That's nice, honey. She kept everything, didn't she? Even your old report cards." Jake nodded and poured himself a glass of water he didn't want. His throat felt like sandpaper. Every swallow hurt. Through the kitchen window, he could see Henderson's house. The porch light made a warm yellow circle on the front steps. Such a normal house. White siding, green shutters, flower boxes full of petunias that Henderson tended every morning with the kind of patience Jake's mom always said came from being a teacher. He asked questions, like what time do Mom and Dad get home from work? Pictures of me, through my bedroom window. He knows I know. "Jake?" Mom was looking at him with concern. "You okay?" "You look pale." He forced himself to focus. "Yeah, just tired. Long day." Dad folded his paper. "Why don't you stay for dinner?" "Your mom made enough stew to feed the neighborhood. Please tell Jake it's not his fault." Jake's chest went tight again. All these years, he'd carried the guilt like a stone in his pocket. If he'd been home that night, instead of out drinking with Tommy Davis and Brad Walker, if he'd checked on Emma before he went to bed, if he'd listened when she tried to tell him about the weird dreams she'd been having, about feeling like someone was watching her. She had tried to tell him, not directly. Emma never did anything directly, but in that sideways way kids had when they were scared but didn't know how to say it. "I think someone's been in my room," she'd said the week before she vanished. "Things are moved around." "You're being paranoid," Jake had told her. "Nobody's been in your room. I found my window unlocked yesterday. I always lock it. You probably just forgot." "Jake, I'm serious. What if someone's watching me?" "Em, you watch too many scary movies. Nobody's watching you." But someone had been. Frank Henderson had been, and Jake had told his 12-year-old sister she was paranoid. "I should get going," Jake said. His voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from somewhere far away. Mom frowned. "You sure? You barely stayed 10 minutes." "Yeah, I need to think about some things." Dad stood up, stretched his back. "You know, I ran into Frank at the post office today. He asked about you, said he hadn't seen you around much lately." Jake's blood turned to ice water. "He did? Nice man, Frank. Always asks about the family. Still feels bad about Emma, you know. Blames himself for not finding her when we were all searching." Jake's hand found the diary in his pocket again. The pages crinkled under his fingers. He said, "No one will believe me anyway, because everyone trusts him." "Yeah," Jake managed. He's a good neighbor." Dad nodded. "Best kind of people in the world, folks like Frank. Always there when you need them. Never ask for anything in return." Jake excused himself to the bathroom and threw up again. When he came back, his parents were discussing whether to plant bulbs this fall or wait until spring. Normal conversation, normal life, normal people who had no idea that the man they trusted, the man they invited to family barbecues and holiday dinners, was the reason their daughter was gone. Jake kissed his mother's cheek and shook his father's hand and walked out into the evening air that felt too thin to breathe. Henderson's house was 4 houses down. Jake could walk there in 30 seconds, could knock on the door, ask the questions that were tearing through his skull like hornets. "Where is she? What did you do to her? How many other kids?" Instead, he got in his car and drove to the police station. The evening desk sergeant was a woman Jake didn't recognize, maybe 30, tired eyes, coffee stain on her uniform shirt. She looked up when he walked in, took in his pale face and shaking hands. "Can I help you?" Jake pulled out the diary, set it on the counter between them like evidence in a trial. "I need to report new information about a missing person case," he said. "My sister, Emma Caldwell. She disappeared 8 years ago." The sergeant's expression shifted, became more alert. "Emma Caldwell? I remember that case. You found something?" "Her diary, hidden in my grandmother's attic. It names the person who took her." The sergeant reached for a pen. "What's the name?" Jake's throat felt raw. "Frank Henderson. He lives on Maple Street. Everyone trusts him. Everyone thinks he's a good man." The sergeant wrote it down, but Jake could see the doubt creeping into her expression, the careful neutrality cops used when they thought someone might be unhinged. "Son, Frank Henderson has lived in this town for 30 years. He's a retired teacher, volunteers at the food bank. I think there might be some mistake." "Read it," Jake said, pushing the diary across the counter. "Just read the last few entries." She opened it reluctantly, flipped to the end. Jake watched her face change as she read Emma's words, watched the doubt turn to something sharper, more focused. When she finished, she looked up at him with different eyes. "We'll need to get a detective involved," she said. This is serious. But you have to understand, a diary alone isn't enough for an arrest warrant, especially after 8 years. Jake's hands clenched into fists. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying we'll investigate. We'll talk to Henderson, see what he has to say, but without additional evidence." She wrote down everything, the pictures, the threats, the way he manipulated my parents. "I believe you, but a defense attorney would say a 12-year-old girl could have written anything, could have made it up, could have been confused about what she saw." Jake stared at her. "You think my sister made up her own kidnapping?" "I think we need more than a diary to convict a man who's been a pillar of this community for 3 decades. Jake took the diary back, held it against his chest like armor. "What if I can get more evidence?" The sergeant's eyes narrowed. "What kind of evidence?" "I don't know yet, but if he took Emma, if he's had her all this time, there has to be something, some trace, some proof." The woman leaned forward, voice gentle but firm. "I need you to promise me you won't do anything dangerous. If Frank Henderson is guilty of what this diary suggests, he's extremely dangerous. You can't confront him alone." Jake nodded, but his fingers were already tracing the shape of his car keys in his pocket. He had no intention of waiting for the police to decide whether Emma's words were worth believing. Frank Henderson lived 4 houses down from the family he'd destroyed, and Jake was done pretending that was a coincidence. Jake sat in his car outside the police station for 20 minutes, engine off, Emma's diary burning a hole in his jacket pocket. The sergeant's words echoed in his skull. Without additional evidence, a diary alone isn't enough. He's been a pillar of this community. 8 years. 8 goddamn years Henderson had walked free while Emma's face stared out from missing person flyers that gradually faded and peeled and blew away in the wind. 8 years of Henderson helping with neighborhood watch meetings, bringing casseroles to sick families, organizing the annual block party where kids played in sprinklers and parents drank beer from red cups, and everyone said what a blessing it was to live somewhere safe. Safe. Jake's hands clenched the steering wheel until his knuckles cracked. He drove home through streets that looked like a movie set, white picket fences and maple trees, and porch lights glowing warm against the gathering dark. The kind of place where people didn't lock their doors, where kids rode bikes until street lights came on, where everyone knew everyone and trusted their neighbors. The kind of place where a man could steal a child and spend 8 years living 4 houses away from her broken family. Jake's apartment was a converted garage behind the Kowalski house on Pine Street, close enough to his parents that he could check on them, far enough that he didn't have to see Emma's empty bedroom every day. He'd moved back after college, told himself it was temporary, told himself he'd leave once his parents were okay. His parents would never be okay. Neither would he. Jake poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat at his kitchen table with Emma's diary open in front of him, reading her words again, looking for details he might have missed, clues that might point towards something the police couldn't ignore. July 5th, 2005. I found pictures. Henderson dropped his folder when he was leaving, and photos fell out. Pictures of me, at the bus stop, in our backyard, through my bedroom window. Emma's bedroom window faced the backyard. From the right angle, you could see straight into her room from the alley that ran behind the houses. Henderson's house backed up to the same alley. Jake knocked back the bourbon, felt it burn his throat raw. He'd walked that alley 1,000 times as a kid, cutting through to Tommy Davis's house, sneaking out to meet girls, taking shortcuts to the corner store. It was narrow, overgrown, lined with chain-link fences and garbage cans in the backs of garages where people stored lawnmowers and Christmas decorations. Perfect for someone who wanted to watch without being seen. Perfect for someone who knew the neighborhood routines, who knew when parents worked late and kids walked home alone. Jake grabbed a flashlight from the junk drawer and headed back out into the night. The alley was darker than he remembered. Streetlights didn't reach back here, just the spill of light from scattered porch lamps and bedroom windows. His boots crunched on gravel and broken glass, kicked at beer cans and fast food wrappers that drifted like urban tumbleweeds. The Caldwell house sat mid-block, a two-story colonial with white siding and blue shutters that his dad repainted every 3 years like clockwork. Emma's bedroom was on the second floor, corner room, windows facing both the street and the alley. Jake stopped directly behind the house and tilted his head up. The window was dark now. His parents had turned Emma's room into a sewing space for his mother, though she never actually sewed anything. Just sat in there sometimes, staring at the walls, touching the furniture Emma had picked out when she turned 10 and decided she was too old for cartoon bedsheets. From where Jake stood, he could see straight into the room, could make out the shape of Emma's old desk, her bookshelf, the rocking chair where she used to read before bed. If Henderson had stood here with a camera, he would have had a perfect view of a 12-year-old girl getting ready for school, doing homework, changing clothes. Jake's stomach turned. He swept the flashlight beam along the ground, looking for something, anything that might prove Henderson had been here. Nothing but weeds and trash and the detritus of 8 years. He moved down the alley toward Henderson's house, counting back gates and fence posts. The old man's property was easy to spot, the only yard that was perfectly maintained, grass cut in neat diagonal lines, flower beds that looked like magazine photos. Henderson's house was dark except for the porch light and a faint glow from what looked like the basement windows. Basement windows. Jake's pulse kicked. Emma's diary hadn't mentioned a basement, but that didn't mean anything. A basement would be perfect for hiding someone. Soundproof. Private. Underground where screams wouldn't carry. He crept closer, staying low behind the fence line. Henderson's backyard was bigger than most, deep enough for a vegetable garden, a tool shed, and a concrete patio where the old man sometimes sat in the evenings with his newspaper and a glass of lemonade. Such a normal yard, such a normal house, such a normal monster. The basement windows were small, set just above ground level, designed to let in light during the day. Now they glowed with the pale flicker of what might have been a television. Jake pressed himself against the fence, trying to get a better angle. The windows were too small to climb through, but large enough to see into if you got close. If you were desperate enough. If you had a little sister who'd been missing for 8 years and a diary that said she was taken by the helpful neighbor everyone trusted. Jake was reaching for the gate latch when a voice cut through the darkness behind him. Beautiful evening for a walk. Jake spun around, heart hammering against his ribs. Frank Henderson stood 10 feet away, hands in his pockets, wearing a cardigan and slippers like he'd just stepped out to check the mail. His white hair caught the faint light from the alley's single working street lamp. He looked exactly the same as he had 8 years ago. Same kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Same gentle smile. Same grandfatherly face that had fooled an entire town. "Jake," Henderson said, voice warm with recognition. "I thought that was you. What brings you to my neck of the woods?" Jake's mouth went dry. His hand found the diary in his jacket pocket, gripped it like a weapon. "Just walking," he managed. "Couldn't sleep." Henderson nodded sympathetically. "I know that feeling. Some nights the mind just won't quiet down, will it? Especially when we're carrying heavy thoughts." The words felt loaded, deliberate, like Henderson knew exactly what thoughts Jake was carrying. "Your parents told me you've been cleaning out your grandmother's attic," Henderson continued, taking a small step closer. "Find anything interesting up there?" Jake's blood turned to ice. His parents hadn't mentioned the attic to Henderson. Jake was sure of it. They'd barely talked about Grandma's death, except in whispers, afraid that any mention of loss might reopen the Emma wound. So how did Henderson know? "Just old stuff," Jake said. His voice sounded thin, stretched tight. Henderson's smile widened just a fraction. Still kind, still gentle, still the smile of a man who helped neighbors and organized block parties and knew where every missing child in the neighborhood had gone. "Sometimes old stuff can be quite valuable," Henderson said. "Quite illuminating. Though, of course, not everything we find is meant to be shared. Some discoveries are better kept private, don't you think?" Jake's hand was shaking now. The diary felt like it was burning through his jacket, through his skin, straight into his bones. Henderson knew. Somehow, impossibly, Henderson knew about the diary. "I should get going," Jake said, backing toward the alley mouth. "Of course," Henderson said. "But Jake? If you ever want to talk about what you found up there, my door is always open. I've always been fond of your family, especially Emma." The name hit Jake like a physical blow. Henderson's voice when he said it was soft, almost caressing, like he was savoring the syllables. Like he'd been saying Emma's name for 8 years. "She was such a special girl," Henderson continued, "so curious, so full of questions. I always wondered what became of her." Jake turned and ran. He sprinted down the alley, boots pounding gravel, breath coming in ragged gasps that tasted like copper and fear. Behind him, Henderson's voice followed like smoke. "Give my regards to your parents, Jake. Tell them I'll stop by soon." Jake didn't stop running until he reached his apartment. He slammed the door, turned the deadbolt, pulled the curtain shut. Then he sat on his couch with Emma's diary clutched against his chest and tried to stop his hands from shaking. Henderson knew about the diary, which meant Henderson had been watching the Caldwell family for 8 years, waiting to see if any evidence would surface. Which meant Emma might still be alive. Which meant she might be in that basement right now, 30 feet from where her parents slept every night, close enough to hear the neighborhood kids playing in their yards on summer evenings, close enough to hear her family calling her name. Jake opened the diary again, flipped to the last entry. "If I don't come back, please tell Jake it's not his fault." But it was his fault. He'd dismissed her fears, told her she was paranoid, left her alone the night Henderson came for her. And now Henderson was threatening him, reminding him that doors were always open, that he could stop by any time, that some discoveries were better kept private. Jake picked up his phone, started to dial the police station, then stopped. What would he tell them? That Henderson had been polite? That he'd mentioned the attic? That he'd asked about Emma in a way that made Jake's skin crawl? None of that was evidence. None of that would get a search warrant. But the basement windows were evidence. If Emma was down there, if Henderson was keeping her in his basement like some kind of pet, then maybe Jake could get proof the police couldn't ignore. Maybe he could get close enough to those windows to see inside. Maybe he could finally bring his sister home. Jake waited until 2 a.m., when the neighborhood was dead quiet, and even the most dedicated insomniacs had given up on sleep. Then he put Emma's diary in his pocket, grabbed his phone and flashlight, and headed back into the darkness. This time, he wasn't running away. Jake didn't sleep. He sat at his kitchen table until dawn, Emma's diary open in front of him, reading her words over and over until they burned themselves into his retinas. Pictures of me, through my bedroom window. He knows I know. Please don't let Henderson hurt anyone else. Every time Jake closed his eyes, he saw Emma's 12-year-old handwriting, the way her letters got smaller and shakier with each entry, the way her fear bled through the ink onto pages that had waited 8 years to tell their story. By morning, Jake felt hollow, wrung out, like he'd been crying without tears, grieving without relief. He made coffee with hands that shook, burned his toast, stood at his kitchen window, staring at nothing while his breakfast turned to ash in his mouth. Henderson lived 4 houses down from Jake's parents, close enough to walk there in 2 minutes, close enough to see the Caldwell house from his front porch, close enough to watch, to wait, to remember. Jake showered, dressed, tried to figure out what the hell he was supposed to do with a day that felt like the rest of his life balanced on its edge. He drove to work, the construction site where he'd been framing houses for the past 3 years, honest work that paid the bills and kept his hands busy. But today his mind wandered, his measurements came out wrong, and by lunch his foreman pulled him aside. "You okay, Caldwell? You seem off." Jake nodded, lied, said he'd had a rough night. The foreman looked skeptical, but let it go. Jake ate his sandwich in his truck, engine running, air conditioning blowing stale air that smelled like sawdust and disappointment. Emma's diary sat on the passenger seat like a live thing, dangerous to touch but impossible to ignore. He'd been carrying it everywhere since he found it. Couldn't bear to leave it at home, couldn't stand to have it out of his sight. What if Henderson came looking for it? What if he broke into Jake's apartment, searched through his things, found the one piece of evidence that could destroy his perfect life? Jake's phone buzzed. Text from his mother. "Dinner Sunday? Your father's grilling." He stared at the message, tried to imagine sitting at his parents' table, making small talk about work and weather while Emma's words echoed in his skull. Tried to imagine not grabbing his father by the shoulders and screaming the truth until someone finally listened. She tried to tell us. She documented everything. She left us a map to find her, and we threw it away. Jake typed back, "Maybe. Work's been crazy." Another lie. Another deflection. Another brick in the wall of silence that had surrounded Emma's disappearance for 8 years. But what else could he do? Walk into Sunday dinner and announce that Frank Henderson, their helpful neighbor, their trusted friend, was a monster who'd stolen their daughter? They'd think Jake had lost his mind. They'd call someone, maybe suggest therapy, maybe have him committed for observation, and Henderson would hear about it. Henderson heard about everything in their small town. Henderson would know that Jake knew. And then what would happen to Emma? Jake drove home after work with no memory of the route, found himself sitting in his driveway with the engine off and the sun setting behind the trees that lined his street. Normal sounds drifted through his open windows, kids playing in yards, lawnmowers starting up, the distant bark of dogs and hum of traffic. The soundtrack of small-town America, peaceful and safe and wholesome. The kind of place where monsters hid in plain sight. Jake walked to the end of his street, turned onto Maple, counted houses until he reached the Caldwell place. His parents' car was in the driveway, porch light already on, even though dusk was just settling. 4 houses down, Henderson's house looked exactly the same as every other house on the block. White siding, green shutters, flower boxes full of petunias. The American flag hanging from the porch post, car parked neat in the driveway. As Jake watched, Henderson's front door opened. The old man stepped out, wearing khakis and a cardigan, carrying a watering can toward his flower boxes. He moved slowly, carefully, like someone who had all the time in the world. Like someone who had nowhere else to be, nothing to hide, no reason to hurry. Henderson watered his petunias with the same attention he probably gave to everything, methodical, precise, caring. The kind of neighbor every parent wanted living next door to their children. The kind of man who organized block parties and helped with homework and remembered everyone's birthdays. The kind of man who took pictures through bedroom windows and made 12-year-old girls disappear. Henderson finished with the flowers, straightened up, stretched his back like the movement caused him pain. An old man's gesture, harmless and human. Then he turned and looked directly at Jake. Across 50 yards of suburban evening, their eyes met. Henderson's expression didn't change. No surprise, no guilt, no recognition of wrongdoing. Just a polite nod, the kind neighbors exchanged when they spotted each other across the street. Henderson raised his hand in a small wave. Jake's blood turned to ice water, but he found himself waving back. Some automatic response, some ingrained politeness that kicked in before his brain could stop it. Henderson smiled, that same gentle, grandfatherly smile Jake remembered from childhood. Then he turned and walked back into his house, closing the door with a soft click that somehow carried across the distance. Jake stood on the sidewalk for a long time after Henderson disappeared, watching the house, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. Lights came on in the living room, then the kitchen. Normal evening sounds, normal evening routines. But Jake couldn't shake the feeling that Henderson had been expecting him, that the old man had known Jake would come, had been waiting for this moment since the day Emma's diary surfaced in their grandmother's attic, had been waiting for Jake to finally understand what everyone else in town refused to see. Jake walked home as darkness settled over Maple Street like a blanket, Henderson's wave replaying in his mind like a greeting between old friends, or a warning between enemies who finally knew where they stood. Jake started watching Henderson's house the next morning. Not close enough to be obvious. Just a guy taking walks, jogging past, sitting on the bench at the corner bus stop with a newspaper he wasn't reading. the kind of casual surveillance that looked like coincidence if anyone bothered to notice. Henderson's routine was precise as a Swiss watch. Coffee on the front porch at 7 sharp, reading what looked like the morning paper. Trip to the post office at 9:15, always stopping to chat with Mrs. Patterson about her roses or Principal Walsh about the upcoming school year. Grocery shopping on Wednesdays. Library visits on Fridays. Church every Sunday morning, third pew from the front, shaking hands with the pastor and complimenting whoever had brought the coffee cake for fellowship hour. The perfect neighbor, the model citizen. But Jake was looking for cracks now, watching for the moments when Henderson's mask might slip. And he found them. Little things. Tiny inconsistencies that probably meant nothing to anyone else, but felt like neon signs to Jake's paranoid brain. The way Henderson's grocery bags always seemed too heavy for just one person. The way he sometimes made 2 trips from his car, carrying plastic sacks that clinked like they held more than one person's worth of canned goods. The way Henderson always parked in his driveway instead of the garage, like he needed quick access to his car. The way he never stayed outside past sunset, never lingered on his porch after dark like other neighbors did on warm summer evenings. And the basement windows. Jake couldn't stop staring at those basement windows. During the day they looked normal, dark rectangles set into the foundation, probably used for storage or a workshop. But at night there was always a faint glow. Not bright enough to really notice unless you were looking for it, but consistent enough that Jake started timing it. Lights on at 7 p.m., off at 11, sometimes midnight, like someone was keeping regular hours down there, like someone had a schedule to maintain. Jake bought a pair of binoculars at the sporting goods store, told the clerk he was thinking about birdwatching. Felt ridiculous carrying them home, but paranoia had killed his shame somewhere around day 3 of his surveillance. From his apartment window, Jake could just see the edge of Henderson's backyard through the trees. Not enough to make out details, but enough to watch for movement, for changes in routine. On Thursday night, Jake saw Henderson in his backyard at 11 p.m., long after his usual bedtime. The old man was carrying something, a bag or bundle, from his back door toward what looked like a storage shed. Jake grabbed the binoculars, tried to get a better look, but Henderson was already disappearing into the shed. A few minutes later, he emerged empty-handed and went back inside. Jake's hands were shaking as he lowered the binoculars. What did Henderson keep in that shed? What was important enough to take care of at 11 o'clock at night? Friday morning, Jake called in sick to work. His foreman wasn't happy, but Jake promised he'd be back Monday and tried not to think about how many more lives this investigation was going to cost him. He spent the day at the public library, this time looking up Henderson's previous addresses. The newspaper archives were digitized going back to 1995, and Jake scrolled through them looking for anything, any mention of Frank Henderson, any unusual disappearances in the towns where he'd lived. What he found made his stomach drop. Millfield, Pennsylvania. Henderson had taught there from 2001 to 2003. In September 2002, a 10-year-old girl named Rachel Bennett had vanished from her bedroom. Never found. Case went cold after 6 months. Riverside, Ohio. Henderson taught there from 2003 to 2005. In April 2004, 12-year-old Nicole Richards disappeared walking home from school. Also never found. Jake printed everything, hands shaking as the pages came out of the machine. 3 missing girls, 3 different towns, 3 different states, all places where Frank Henderson had worked, all cases that went unsolved. Jake drove home with the printouts burning a hole in his passenger seat, his mind racing. This wasn't just about Emma. Henderson was a predator, a serial kidnapper who'd been perfecting his technique for years, and he'd landed in their quiet town like a spider finding the perfect web. That night, Jake couldn't sit still. He paced his apartment, checked and rechecked the locks, jumped at every sound from the street outside. At 1 a.m., he gave up on sleep and walked back to Maple Street. Henderson's house was dark except for the basement glow. But as Jake watched from the shadows across the street, he saw something that made his breath catch. A shadow moved past one of the basement windows. Quick, there and gone, but definitely human-shaped. Too small to be Henderson. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. He moved closer, staying low behind parked cars, trying to get a better angle on those windows. The shadow passed again, slower this time. Jake caught a glimpse of long hair, a slight build, someone moving carefully like they didn't want to make noise. Someone who'd learned to be quiet. Someone who'd been learning for 8 years. Jake pulled out his phone, started to dial 911, then stopped. What would he tell them? That he saw a shadow? That he'd been stalking his neighbor and thought maybe someone was in the basement? The police would think he was having a breakdown. They'd probably arrest him for harassment, and Henderson would know that Jake was on to him. And then what would happen to Emma? What would happen to the scared shadow moving past those basement windows at 1 in the morning? Jake needed more than shadows. He needed proof. He needed to get inside that house. Jake crept around to Henderson's backyard, staying low, moving slow. The shed Henderson had visited Thursday night was wooden, painted white to match the house, with a simple padlock holding the door shut. Jake used a rock to break the lock, wincing at the sound of metal snapping. But the neighborhood stayed quiet, no lights coming on, no dogs barking. Inside the shed, Jake's flashlight beam revealed garden tools, bags of fertilizer, coiled hoses. Normal storage shed contents. But against the back wall was something that made Jake's blood run cold. A filing cabinet locked with neat labels on each drawer. Documentation, photographs, medical records. Jake used a screwdriver from Henderson's workbench to force the top drawer open. Inside were manila folders, each labeled with a girl's name and dates. Rachel, Nicole, Emma, and others. Names Jake didn't recognize, faces smiling out from school photos and family snapshots. More girls, more missing children, more lives Henderson had stolen. Jake's hands shook as he opened Emma's folder. Inside were dozens of photographs. Emma at the bus stop, Emma in their backyard, Emma through her bedroom window getting dressed for school. And at the bottom of the folder, a single sheet of paper with Henderson's careful handwriting. Subject shows promising signs of compliance. Transition to secure location recommended for July 11th. Long-term housing preparations complete. Jake's vision blurred. Henderson hadn't just taken Emma on impulse. He'd planned it for weeks, maybe months. Had been studying her, documenting her routines, preparing a place to keep her. Preparing to make her disappear forever. Jake photographed everything with his phone. The folders, the pictures, Henderson's notes. Evidence the police couldn't dismiss. Proof that would finally bring Henderson down. But as he was closing the filing cabinet, Jake heard a sound that made his blood freeze. The back door of Henderson's house was opening. Footsteps on the patio, moving toward the shed. Jake clicked off his flashlight, crouched behind the filing cabinet, tried to make himself invisible in the darkness. Henderson's voice drifted through the night air, calm and conversational. "I know you're in there, Jake. Why don't you come out so we can talk?" Jake's heart hammered so loud he was sure Henderson could hear it through the shed walls. He crouched behind the filing cabinet, phone clutched in his sweaty palm, trying to decide whether to run or hide or call for help. "I know you're in there, Jake," Henderson's voice called from outside the shed. "Come out. There's nothing to find in there." Jake's thumb hovered over his phone screen. The photos he'd taken of the files, of Emma's folder, of Henderson's careful documentation. All of it was evidence, proof that Henderson was a monster. But Emma was in that basement. Jake was sure of it now. "I don't know what you think you're doing," Henderson continued, his voice still calm but with an edge creeping in. "But you're trespassing on private property. You need to leave." Jake took a deep breath and pushed open the shed door. Henderson stood in the middle of his backyard, bathrobe pulled tight, hair mussed from sleep. But his eyes were alert, calculating. "You're seeing things that aren't there, son," Henderson said, voice gentle but firm. "Grief can make a person imagine all sorts of nonsense. You should go home. Get some rest." Jake held up his phone, showing the photos he'd taken. "I have pictures of your files, pictures of Emma's folder, pictures of Rachel Bennett and Nicole Richards. Henderson's expression didn't change, but Jake caught a flicker of something in his eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about. You're confused, Jake, upset. You're imagining things." "I'm not imagining anything," Jake said, his voice stronger now. "I know what you did. I know what you are." Henderson took a step closer, hands raised peacefully. "You're having some kind of breakdown. That's understandable. Losing a sister is traumatic, but you can't go around making wild accusations." A sound cut through the night air, faint but unmistakable. Piano music, coming from Henderson's basement. The same melody Emma used to play when she was homesick or scared. Jake's blood went cold. "What was that?" Henderson's face went white. "What was what?" "I didn't hear anything." "That music," Jake said, moving toward the house. "Someone's playing piano in your basement." Henderson stepped sideways, blocking Jake's path. "You're imagining things. There's no one in my house. Go home, Jake." But the panic was showing now. Henderson's voice was higher, strained. His hands were shaking. Jake pushed past him, heading for the back door. "Emma!" he shouted. "Emma, I'm here!" Henderson grabbed Jake's arm. "Stop it! You're going to wake the whole neighborhood!" The piano music stopped abruptly. Jake wrenched free and ran to the basement windows, dropping to his knees, pressing his face to the glass. The basement was lit by a single lamp. Jake could see furniture, a bed, a couch, a small kitchen area. And sitting at an old upright piano was a young woman with long brown hair. She looked up at the window, eyes wide with shock. Emma, 20 years old now, but unmistakably Emma. "Emma!" Jake screamed, pounding on the glass. "Emma, it's Jake!" She stood up from the piano bench, moving toward the window. Her mouth formed his name, though he couldn't hear her through the glass. Henderson appeared beside Jake, grabbed his shoulders, tried to pull him away from the window. "You need to leave," Henderson said, all pretense of calm gone now. "You need to leave right now." Jake fought against Henderson's grip, reaching for the basement window. "Let me in. Let me see her." "There's nobody down there," Henderson shouted. "You're hallucinating. You're having a psychotic break." But even as Henderson said it, Emma was visible through the window, pressing her hands against the glass from the inside, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, my God," Jake breathed. "Oh, my God, is that... How did she get there?" Henderson's grip loosened for just a moment. His face went through a series of expressions: panic, confusion, then something that looked almost like relief. "Oh, no," Henderson said, his voice changing completely. "Oh, no, Jake, I can explain this. This isn't what it looks like." Jake stared at him. "What do you mean this isn't what it looks like?" "That's Emma. That's my sister." Henderson's hands fluttered helplessly. I found her, Jake. Years ago. She was hurt, confused. She didn't remember who she was. I've been taking care of her." "You're lying," Jake said, but Henderson was already moving toward the back door, keys jingling in his shaking hands. "I can prove it," Henderson said frantically. "I can show you. She's been sick, Jake. Amnesia, brain damage. I've been trying to help her remember, but the doctors said forcing it could be dangerous." Henderson unlocked the back door, his story spilling out faster now. "She showed up at my door one night, barely conscious. No ID, no memory of where she came from. I should have called the police, but she was so scared, so fragile. I thought I could help her." Jake followed Henderson into the house, his mind reeling. When did this happen?" 3 years ago, Henderson said quickly. "Maybe 4. Time gets blurry when you're caring for someone with that kind of trauma." Henderson was moving toward the basement door now, still talking, still explaining. "The doctors said familiar faces might trigger her memories, but they warned me it could also cause more trauma. I've been protecting her, Jake, keeping her safe while she heals." They reached the basement door. Henderson's hand shook as he worked the locks. "You have to be gentle with her. Don't push too hard. Don't try to make her remember too much at once." The locks clicked open one by one. "Jake," Henderson said, his voice breaking now. "You don't understand. I saved her. I protected her. She was dying when I found her. Dying and alone and scared. I gave her a home. I gave her love. I gave her everything she needed." The last lock opened. Henderson's story was falling apart, and he knew it. "I never meant for it to go this long," Henderson whispered. "But she was so damaged, so broken, and she was happy here, safe. I couldn't bear to send her back out into the world that had hurt her so badly." Henderson opened the basement door. "You have to understand," he said, tears in his eyes now. "I love her, like a daughter, like family. Everything I did was to protect her from the people who failed her the first time." Jake pushed past Henderson and ran down the basement stairs. Emma was standing at the bottom, hands clasped in front of her, looking up at him with a mixture of hope and terror. "Jake?" she whispered. Behind him, Henderson's voice cracked completely. "I'm not a monster. I'm not what you think I am. I couldn't let her go. I couldn't let the world hurt her again." Jake reached Emma and pulled her into his arms, feeling her shake against his chest. Over her head, he could see Henderson standing at the top of the stairs, finally broken, finally telling the truth. "I kept her safe," Henderson sobbed. "For 8 years, I kept her safe. That has to count for something. That has to matter." Jake held his sister tighter and reached for his phone to call 911. The nightmare was finally over. Jake held Emma against his chest, feeling how small she was, how fragile, like 8 years of captivity had worn her down to bird bones and whispered breath. "It's okay," he murmured into her hair, words he'd dreamed of saying for 8 years. "It's okay, Em. I'm here. I found you." She pulled back to look at his face, her hands trembling as they touched his cheeks, like she couldn't believe he was real. "You grew up," she said, voice cracked with disuse and tears. "You look so different." Jake's throat closed. Emma looked different too, still his little sister's face, but hollow around the eyes, careful in a way that spoke of years learning when to be quiet, when to be invisible, when to be grateful for scraps of kindness. Above them, Henderson had stopped sobbing. Jake could hear him moving around upstairs, footsteps creaking across the kitchen floor. "We need to go," Jake said, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling the police." Emma's eyes went wide, panicked. "No," she whispered. "He'll hear you. He doesn't like it when I'm loud." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. 8 years of conditioning, 8 years of learning to be afraid of her own voice. "He can't hurt you anymore," Jake said, but even as he said it, he could hear Henderson's footsteps moving toward the basement door. Jake dialed 911, his thumb shaking on the screen. 911, what's your emergency?" "I found my sister," Jake said, voice breaking. "Emma Caldwell. She's been missing for 8 years. I'm at 247 Maple Street. The man who took her is here." "Sir, did you say Emma Caldwell?" "The missing girl from 2005? "Yes, she's alive. She's in Frank Henderson's basement. Send everyone." Above them, the basement door slammed shut. The sound of locks clicking into place echoed down the stairs like gunshots. Emma flinched at each click, pressing closer to Jake. "He's locking us in," she whispered. Jake tried the door handle, knowing it was useless. Henderson had trapped them both in the basement with Emma, like some twisted family reunion he could control. "Police are on their way," Jake told the dispatcher. "But we're locked in the basement. The suspect has trapped us inside." "Stay on the line, sir. Units are 3 minutes out." 3 minutes. Jake looked around the basement that had been Emma's prison for 8 years. It was exactly what Henderson had said, furnished like a studio apartment, bed, kitchenette, bookshelf full of novels, television mounted on the wall. Everything a person would need to live. Everything except freedom. "He made it nice," Emma said, following Jake's gaze. "He said he wanted me to be comfortable. said comfort was important for healing. Jake's hands clenched into fists. "Em, you know this isn't normal, right? You know he kidnapped you?" Emma's expression grew confused, conflicted. "He saved me," she said, but the words sounded rehearsed. "I was in danger at home. He kept me safe." 8 years of gaslighting. 8 years of being told that imprisonment was rescue, that isolation was protection. Above them, Henderson's voice called down through the door. "Emma, sweetheart, I need you to listen to me." Emma looked toward the stairs instinctively, like a dog hearing its master's voice. "Don't," Jake said, grabbing her hand. "Don't listen to him." But Henderson was still talking, his voice carrying the same gentle authority Jake remembered from childhood. "Jake doesn't understand what we have here. He doesn't understand how much I care about you, how much we care about each other." Emma's face crumpled. "He's scared," she said. "He doesn't mean to hurt anyone. He just gets confused sometimes." Jake stared at his sister, saw how completely Henderson had twisted her reality. Emma wasn't just Stockholm Syndrome. She was genuinely convinced that Henderson was her protector, that Jake was the threat. "Emma," Jake said gently, "do you remember writing in your diary before you disappeared?" She frowned. "Diary?" "A red leather diary. You wrote about being scared, about Henderson taking pictures of you through your bedroom window." Emma shook her head. "I don't remember that. Frank says I used to have nightmares, paranoid thoughts. He helped me work through them." Henderson's voice came through the door again. "The police will want to separate us, Emma. They'll try to convince you that what we have is wrong. But you know better, don't you? You know how much I love you." Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Emma's breathing quickened. "They're going to take me away," she said. "They're going to put me in a hospital. Frank said they would." "No," Jake said firmly. "They're going to take you home. To Mom and Dad, to your real family." "This is my family," Emma said, tears streaming down her face. "Frank is my family. He's the only one who never left me." The words cut deep. Jake remembered every time he'd brushed Emma off, every birthday party he'd missed, every moment he'd chosen his own life over protecting his little sister. "I left you," Jake said, his voice breaking. "I failed you, but I'm here now. I'm not leaving again." The sirens were louder now, multiple vehicles pulling up outside. Jake could hear car doors slamming, voices shouting orders. Henderson's voice through the door was desperate now. "They don't understand us, Emma. They don't understand what we've built together. But you know, don't you? You know how good we are together." Heavy footsteps on the floor above. Police in the house. "Frank Henderson, this is the police. We have a warrant. Come out with your hands visible." The basement door rattled as someone tried the handle from the other side. "We're down here," Jake shouted. "Emma Caldwell is down here." More voices, urgent radio chatter. Then the sound of power tools, officers cutting through Henderson's locks. Emma pressed against Jake, shaking. "I don't want to go," she whispered. "I want to stay here. This is my home." The door burst open. Flashlight beams cut through the basement like searchlights. Police officers in tactical gear thundered down the stairs. "Emma Caldwell?" The first officer was a woman, voice gentle despite the chaos. "Emma, I'm Officer Martinez. You're safe now." Emma shrank back against the wall. "I want Frank," she said. "Where's Frank?" "He's being arrested," Officer Martinez said. "Emma, do you remember your family? Your parents, Linda and Tom Caldwell?" Emma looked confused, lost. "Frank is my family." Jake's heart broke all over again. Henderson hadn't just stolen Emma's body. He'd stolen her mind, her memories, her understanding of who she was supposed to be. More officers filled the basement, taking photos, collecting evidence. The space that had been Emma's entire world for 8 years was now a crime scene. "We need to get you both to the hospital," Officer Martinez said. "Emma needs medical evaluation, and Jake, you'll need to give a full statement." As they led Emma up the stairs, she looked back at the basement one more time. "This was my home," she said quietly. Jake put his arm around her shoulders. "Your real home is 4 houses down," he said. "Mom and Dad are waiting. They never stopped waiting." Outside, Frank Henderson sat in the back of a police cruiser, hands cuffed behind his back. When he saw Emma, his face crumpled. "I love you," he called out through the car window. "Everything I did was because I love you." Emma stopped walking, stared at Henderson with confusion and something that looked like grief. "I know," she said softly. And Jake realized that the hardest part wasn't over. Finding Emma was just the beginning. Now they had to figure out how to bring her home. 6 months later, Jake sat in the visitor's room at Riverside Psychiatric Hospital, watching Emma work on a puzzle. Her hands were steadier now, her eyes clearer. The doctors said she was making progress. "I remembered something yesterday," Emma said without looking up from the puzzle pieces. "About my 13th birthday party, the one I never got to have." Jake's throat tightened. "Yeah? You were supposed to help with decorations, but you went out instead." Emma's voice was matter-of-fact, not accusing. "I was mad at you." "I'm sorry," Jake said for the 100th time. Emma looked up at him then, really looked at him. "I know you are, but Jake, being angry at you was better than forgetting you existed?" She went back to her puzzle. "The doctors say I might be ready for supervised visits home soon, to see Mom and Dad." "They'd like that," Jake said. "They've been waiting." Emma nodded. "Frank always said they'd moved on, that they were happier without me." "Frank lied about a lot of things." "I know that now." Emma fitted 2 puzzle pieces together. "But he didn't lie about everything. I was invisible at home. I did feel forgotten." Jake watched his sister's careful hands, her concentration on the simple task of putting pieces back together. "You won't be invisible anymore," he said. Emma smiled, the first real smile Jake had seen from her since he found her in that basement. "I know," she said, "because you see me now." Outside the hospital windows, snow was falling on a world that had finally learned Emma Caldwell's name again. Frank Henderson was serving 3 consecutive life sentences. Emma was learning to remember who she used to be, and Jake was learning that sometimes finding someone is just the first step in bringing them home.